Howdy, Ascenders. Hunter here, one of your coaches this fall semester. Today, we're going to be discussing Controlling Cross, a guide to both questioning and answering effectively. In this video, we're going to discuss exactly what the overarching objectives are, both for questioning and answering, ways to go about improving, and of course, practices that you can keep in mind for staying at the top of your game. So, with that all established, the first thing we need to discuss is the different types of cross-examination. First things first, indirect questioning. Now, this is the version you will see most commonly at local tournaments, usually in national prelim rounds, as well as in a number of smaller tournaments with smaller stakes. The way it works is that after a speaker has finished their speaking process, you will see the rest of the round given the chance to stand up and ask a question. Each person that stands is going to be allocated one question as per recency and precedence, and generally, questioning of this nature will not allow prefacing, meaning bringing in outside information that has not already been mentioned in the debate. You can't cite sources, you can't cite examples, you have to focus your questions exclusively on what has been said by other speakers in the round or what the speaker just said during their debate. Neither are multi-part questions allowed. No yes, no, and why. It has to be one solid question for the answerer to respond to. Outside of indirect questioning, the other type you will see is direct questioning. Each questioner is allocated a solid 30 seconds of uninterrupted time for questions. They can use that time however they see fit in regards to the number of questions they ask, what those questions look like, and how exactly they want to go about structuring it. Prefacing also is allowed, meaning that if you want to cite examples or sources that have not been brought up in the debate, you can do so during this period. Generally, you will see this questioning most commonly at most national tournaments, especially in semi and finals rounds. This is going to be the more rigorous type of questioning that is most often associated with very high stakes rounds and tournaments. This all being said, now we need to break down exactly what the objectives are, both for questioners and answerers engaging in this process. Now, when it comes to questioning, the first essential thing you want to remember is that any given speaker, regardless of how long they've been doing this activity, how many hours they've poured into it, is never going to have a speech that is completely absent any kind of argumentative flaw. More often than not, we are debating policy issues that researchers have spent years of their life researching and discussing and attempting to find comprehensive solutions for. No high school debater in the span of 3 minutes will be able to present something so compelling it overdoes those years of research and finally answers a question once and for all. Knowing that, questioning serves the fundamental purpose of bringing those flaws to light, finding the argumentative issues in any given speech and presenting them to be discussed. So, with this in mind, we can break down questioning into two key aspects. Number one, the debate purpose, and number two, what it serves for presentation. First, debate. If you're going to ask questions, you are presented the opportunity to bring down one of the opposing side's contentions. Highlighting inconsistencies gives your judge a reason to prefer your side. Because by eliminating the ground in which your opposition stands, there is now more reason to believe the arguments that have been presented by the other side. Outside of your debate purpose, there is also the presentational aspect of questioning. In essence here, judges want to rank up individuals inside of the round who appear knowledgeable. Your job is to convey some understanding that you know what you are doing and are the most effective debater at communicating this knowledge. By demonstrating you can critically think not just about your own speech, not just about your own contentions, but about the ideas that you are organically responding to in round, you are boosting your perception. Now the judge knows that you are the smartest debater present and has all the more reason to make you their one. Outside of questioning, answering comes with its own set of priorities as well. Once you have provided your arguments at the end of your speech, questioning is your opportunity to defend them, to answer and eliminate the doubt that is remaining in the minds of any of the audience, any of your fellow debaters. Anyone watching the round now sees that not only are you fully capable of delivering this when you have the time to think about it, but you can adapt to what others have said and provide answers that showcase your understanding of the issue. So, with this in mind, recognize that as an answerer, your job isn't to beat the questioners, or at the very least, it's not to bring them down in some way or to antagonize them. Your victory in answering is to answer their questions succinctly and effectively. There is no need to antagonize questioners, to try and refute them in the middle of their question. All of that is secondary. All you should focus on is preserving the speech in front of you. Leave the antagonization for refutation and other things that happen during the speech. Don't bring it into questioning. With this in mind, you have two central objectives boiling back down to debate and presentation. From the debate side of things, you want to make sure that for the judge to vote for your side, your contentions are safe. This can only happen if you demonstrate you know them well enough to answer any lingering doubts the other side may have. Outside of that, presentation. You, as an answerer, want to have some semblance of command, demonstrating that other speakers cannot shake you, cannot break you, and at the very least will not find a way to tear down your speech is what leadership boils down to. That kind of composure, that kind of command is exactly what judges look for when making their decision. So giving answers that reestablish that command is paramount to effective cross-examination. With these things under consideration, let's go ahead and break down exactly how to go about asking questions effectively. Now, when it comes to indirect questioning, the first thing you're going to want to consider is the fact that your job is to cast doubt on the arguments of the speaker. Like we talked about, we want to reduce the perceived knowledgeability of other people and increase our own in the process. So, where do we start looking? There are two places that I'm going to recommend as fundamental to effective questioning, but of course, this is by no means an all-extensive list. Number one, logical flaws. The first thing you're going to want to tackle when you're reading, or rather listening to someone else's speech, is where are the flaws in their reasoning, in their argumentation, and in their contention. This is most apparent, and where you want to center the most of your time in examining is going to be their warrant and their solvency. So to speak, you want to focus your attack on what they are saying the bill is going to do and why the bill is going to do it. Any single impact the other side can make is predicated on them proving the bill is going to lead to something. If you find ways to cast doubt on that leading effect, now you have the ability to showcase exactly why the judge should be doubtful over the things they have said. So, to find these logical flaws in the most effective way, here are some questions you can ask yourself. Number one, is the speaker proving the bill is going to change the status quo and adequately explaining why? Very, very commonly, you will see debaters give speeches that demonstrate exactly why a concept in the bill is good or bad. In essence here, if they are giving a speech about private prisons, they will do an excellent job explaining what is wrong with private prisons. However, every single bill you are reading is more than likely going to have a section that changes the concept as we understand it. Maybe that private prison bill is increasing funding for these institutions. Maybe it's changing how oversight works at private prisons. Regardless, it is changing the concept in some way, meaning that if that speaker is not addressing how a concept will be changed by the bill, you can ask questions to demonstrate the fact that there is no argumentative weight to that argument. Speakers need to show exactly why the provisions of the bill will change issues as we understand them, not just what the issues are right now. If someone is not doing an adequate job here, we have an opening for questions. Second, the next thing you want to consider, if we are thinking about logical flaws, is does the speaker showcase that there is no other reason why change might be occurring outside of the bill? Like we talked about, other than just proving that a bill is going to have an effect, you need to prove causality. What that means is that the bill is causing something. More specifically, the effect that a speaker is saying is going to be good or bad. However, one of the biggest problems that exists in social science and for policymakers right now is actually finding out whether or not a bill leads to something, or if it's one of 100 different other variables that can't be controlled for. I'll give you a bit of a thought experiment to help you think about this. Let's say you were to give the argument that ground troops that America uses are bad. We should not send ground troops to other countries. That is a claim. Maybe the data you use says that when we put ground troops in another nation, that nation is 6 times more likely to collapse. Thus, we should not use ground troops. Thus, ground troops are bad. Keep in mind one central thing. Now, under basic principle of causality, the idea is that ground troops would be causing the state collapse. But consider for a second what other variables might exist. Maybe the issue isn't that ground troops are causing the collapse. Maybe the issue is that nations the United States is putting ground troops in were already more prone to collapse in the first place. Maybe they are already facing interstate terrorism or other variables that make them more likely to collapse outside of the deployment of ground troops. Finding these other variables is the exact way you can showcase a logical flaw underlining argumentation. Look for these kinds of confounding variables. They exist for every single policy issue you look at. So always be asking yourself the question, does anything else lead to the effect the speaker is saying is going to happen? The third and final thing to consider when thinking about logical flaws is going to be ensuring that there is a comparative. In essence here's what I mean. Outside of just explaining why an existing concept is bad, you need to make sure the speaker you're listening to is adequately comparing it to other options that would be used. For instance, if you're giving a speech in favor of banning charter schools, you are not doing enough of an argumentative job if you merely say that charter schools are corrupt, because you are not comparing them to the only other alternative, public and private schooling. Every single argument you hear needs to be comparative in order to have argumentative weight. Are they adequately explaining that other options would be just as bad or better? Because if that doesn't exist, now you have another avenue for effective questioning. Obviously, these are not all of the logical flaws that can exist for a speech, but each and every single one of those principles is another good way for finding those flaws and asking questions effectively. Now, under the impression that somebody has given a speech so perfect you can't find a single flaw underlining their argumentation, there is still a way to ask them questions effectively, and it's through weighing. If somebody believes that their argument is untouchable, what you can do is compare the significance of their impacts to things that your side has said. In essence here, this boils down to one question to keep in mind. Even if their argument is true, is their impact more important than the impacts given by your side? Think about this through a number of lenses, all of which are tied to the way that you define what importance is. Maybe you look at scope. Maybe the speaker speaking has said that 20,000 lives will be saved if we pass this bill, but your side has said 40,000 people will die. This presents the opportunity for you to ask a question in the weighing format. Why should we care about the 20,000 individuals that we're saving if, as Representative Blank said, 40,000 people are going to die in the process? That is an effective weighing question. Keep in mind that when you go about weighing, you are more than allowed to bring in arguments made by other speakers. Using your side in questioning cements your ability not just to use your own speech as reference, but to organically adapt to the ideas you're hearing that other people have brought forward. That enhances your perception in the mind of a judge and cements the idea that you are a good debater. With this in mind, keep in mind that regardless of what you decide to do for indirect questioning, you need to make your phrasing count. Force your opponent to give you a real answer by asking the right question words. What I mean is use terms like why or how, because they force an explanation that is going to be longer. Simply asking questions like, do you believe, or would this, or if blank, then wouldn't this? All of these questions suffer from the same problem, and it's the fact that they can be brushed aside with a yes or no. How and why forces your opponent to think more about your issue, to think more about the flaw you're highlighting, and it opens up the door for them to reduce their perceived knowledgeability if they are doing a bad job thinking about the question that you have asked. Now, outside of just the content, delivery, just as important for indirect questioning. Recognize that even if you're not actively speaking, your presentation is constantly being observed by your judges. Even if you're not in front of the round giving a speech, your character in that round is still being perceived. Focus on enhancing your presentation to still look strong while asking questions. Now, with this in mind, we have to answer what exactly is the effective way to present for questioning. The answer is to tailor your presentation to the kind of question being asked. No, you cannot be overly passionate all the time in questioning, but at the same time, you can't be remote and cold and methodical the entire time as well. It's a matter of asking yourself what kind of question you are asking. So, with this in mind, if you were to inquire into someone's logic, asking about logical flaws in their speech, you want your presentation to be more conversational, to be calmer, more rational, because you are trying to focus on getting an objective answer. Logical inconsistencies call for calmness and composure because it's designed to be a very rational conversation. What matters here are the words we're exchanging, not the way in which we're exchanging them. Second, if you were asking a question that is more about weighing, more about comparing significance, you are talking about lives, talking about thousands of people either saved or killed by a certain piece of legislation. Thus, your presentation needs to be more impassioned. Increase your emotional delivery to actually cement the fact that you care about these individuals, even if it's not factoring in to your speech's ranking. With this in mind, recognize that emotions should be about contentions. You should not be angry at your fellow members of Congress. Emphasize words in your question that demonstrate the emotion that is going into the people you're discussing. Do not get aggressive or overly sad with other debaters, because that is not what the effective emotional appeal is. Instead, you run the risk of antagonizing others, of creating this kind of demonization of the other side that will look bad in front of the judge and will certainly lead to the kind of adversarial questioning periods in which not much of value is exchanged. Focus your emotion on the groups themselves, not on your colleagues. That all said, let's move on to direct questioning. So, all of the things we talked about in regards to logical inconsistencies in weighing, all of them are still valuable for 30-second blocks. However, the added bonus of direct questioning is that 30 seconds gives you the chance to more comprehensively break down someone else's arguments. Now, remember that if you have 30 seconds, you don't necessarily want to start at the logical inconsistency or weighing question you're going to ask. Instead, you should start with establishing questions. Walk the judge and the speaker to the portion of their argument you're going to attack. Start by discussing what it is you're going to poke holes in. So, Representative, you believe that this legislation will save 20,000 people, yes? That is an example of an establishing question. And it's exactly what you're going to want to be your priority inside of the round. With this in mind, you want to make sure that your establishing questions are as simple and direct as possible. If you are asking vague or elaborate questions, the speaker has the chance to give you longer answers that stops you from getting to your real question. So when you are asking somebody what part of the speech you're going to attack, keep these questions precise. Vagueness, indirectness gives them the chance to speak for longer and prevent you from catching them in the trap that you're trying to catch them in. Now, with direct questioning, and like we talked about, speakers will sometimes give answers that are incredibly long. Sometimes it can feel right to want to assert yourself over the questioning period and establish some sense of your ability. If you ever feel like a speaker is rambling, you can try to cut them off, but do so in a respectful way. Don't immediately start yelling over someone. There are other methods for getting someone to allow you to ask your question. For instance, saying something like, "Thank you," so as to indicate that you've gotten an answer to your question is a good way to nicely ask someone to stop speaking to give you the chance to ask more questions. Also, appearing like you're going to start talking can be just as effective. Opening your mouth so as to indicate that you're about to ask something else is another visual cue that the speaker should give you the chance to ask a question. There are dozens of ways to politely ask somebody to stop that does not immediately rely on you yelling at them or immediately rely on you shouting. This is what you want to emphasize, because at the end of the day, nobody is going to win a scream fight. Answers being yelled at you is not a time to yell back. At the end of the day, it is entirely possible for the questioner and the answerer to lose a questioning period. If both people are screaming at each other, no one wins. Keeping yourself composed and calm avoids this problem. And that's what you want to emphasize with direct questioning. So, outside of this, remember that another question is who is going to be the target of the question itself. Now, on a more larger sense, in a far more broader sense, you want to remember that most of your argumentative issues, considering the side of the debate you're on, is going to be with other people on the opposition. The bulk of your questions should be focused on poking holes with those that do not support your advocacy and your contentions, that being the other side. Once you now know who is going to be on that list, there are two other more specific subgroups you can look for. Number one, setting the stage. If you haven't spoken yet, you should focus your questions on speakers with arguments that have similar warrants or concepts. For instance, if you're discussing why a bill will increase terrorism and someone on the other side has said it will decrease terrorism, this is somebody to ask questions to. Why? Because if you are tearing apart these arguments in questioning, you have the chance to reference them when you are giving your speech. Use your questioning period as a foundational time. for you to reference these moments when you give your speech later. It demonstrates the kind of character consistency and debate consistency that gives your judge reason to pay attention to. Your questions are serving a purpose. They are building the speech that you are going to give. Showing a judge you are capable of doing that is an incredibly effective way to establish a strong perception as a debater. Outside of that, if you can't set the stage effectively, or you've already given your speech, so there's no point, punching up is essential. In essence here, you need to make a perceptual distinction. You, in any round you're in, can more than likely recognize the kind of debaters that judges are seeing who are at the top of the round. You have been in tournaments where you have seen the elite be present. You have made a mental note, who is good in this round, who is not doing so well. You want to focus the bulk of your attacks on those round elites. If you are focusing on perceptually the strongest people, you will appear more capable and associate yourself with them if these are the kinds of debaters you're asking questions of. Make yourself an elite by arguing with them. Show you're on their level, show the judge you're ready to break, and be the effective questioner that you can finally be when you take these into consideration. Outside of that, the next thing to ask yourself is how you can go about practicing the things that we've talked about. The number one and primary way I recommend doing this is by flowing rounds. There are dozens of amazing debates currently accessible for free on YouTube with some of the nation's top debaters. If you flow these rounds and look for logical inconsistencies and think of questions you would ask the debaters, you will become better. Being able to identify logical flaws in their speech is exactly what can make you capable of doing it in any given round you find yourself in. And if you're watching these speeches and don't see any inconsistencies, pay attention to the refutation you're hearing. Refutation is an excellent part of the questioning process because both refutation and questioning are built on logical flaws. What people choose to refute in that round gives you another chance to find potential avenues for asking better questions. And that's exactly what makes flowing rounds such an effective way to practice this process. If that doesn't work for you, pre-round speeches are another phenomenal method for getting better. In essence, if you have friends or teammates, listening to their speeches and asking them questions gives you the closest thing there is to emulating the real round process. Put yourself in the same situation you're going to be in round. Yes, that can be scary, but it's the best possible way for you to get in that practice. If you aren't completely emulating the environment that you're trying to do well in, you will not do well in that environment. So expose yourself to it and get stronger as a questioner.